So, good morning everyone, and welcome to the last day of the Identiverse. I hope you had a great show so far. My name is Rolf Lindemann. I'm here to make this last day worthwhile for you to attend. We have some great contents today, but I have to start with a caution. So, this presentation might contain contents that might disturb some of you. So, I hope you are prepared. Let's jump right into that. So the challenge is that Passkeys really, and while I was preparing that, surface some of the realities of the believed truths we have and change the perspective you have on that, and we will get to that. So FIDO Passkeys, FIDO Lines was started a long time ago. I was part of all that. It's really a two-factor authentication which is phishing resistant, very convenient for users. There's a first factor, this is a user gesture in some way. It might be your biometric, might be a PIN you remember, for use for device unlocks, those kind of things. And then there's a second factor, that's the possession of the authenticator. Pretty clear, pretty clean, and then the key is validated on the server, right? And really, if you look into that, what we did in the early beginning was what we now would call a device-bound key or device-bound credential. And device-bound because the private key resides on the device, cannot be exported to that device. And it also means that the relying party is in control of adding new devices, right? So whenever I register my key, I have kind of feedback.
Just a hangover to make it sound like there's a ring.
Okay, so maybe that. Right, so if I have multiple devices, the relying party helps me to register all these different keys for the different devices. Maybe that's better. And the server side, server only stores the public keys on that. So that's the world we had and was pretty clear, pretty clean before. And now something new happened, and this is known as the passkey, the synced passkey in practice, right, where the passkey can travel from, or the private key can travel from one device to the other device, and you have heard about that in many different presentations this week, and so that was really good to see the World Passkey Day in some way on this conference. So we have this passkey provider now on the left-hand side, which facilitates the synchronization of the passkey from, for example, my smartphone to my tablet to my laptop, right, and the other way. So it somehow changes the picture, and we will look into exactly that. How are regulated entities impacted by that different approach, right? You might think, yes, there will be differences, and sure, spoiler alert, yes, there are differences. And let's look into regulations, what the requirements are, and then how the impact really is on those requirements. So what we learned, and I think every one of you has seen this kind of picture before, right? It helps us to put structure in the world of authentication. We have different elements or different factors, right? There's a knowledge factor, something you know. There's a possession factor, something you have. And there's the inherence factor, something you are, right? And we have heard the typical examples and see the typical examples like passwords is the thing you know, possession factors is the OTP token or the phone with the OTP app on it. That's something you possess, you have. Inherence is fingerprint, face, or any other physiological biometrics, not the behavior typically, but don't want to get into those details. And now let's look into the typical regulations. They are all based on this clear concept, right? I will use two different ones, PSD2 on one hand side and the SB 800-63 on the other hand, just as examples, because the other regulations are pretty similar. You find these concepts in almost all regulations, right? PSD2 says you need two or more, they call it elements of those things, which we just saw, right? And SB 863 talks about two distinct authentication factors, different wording, right? Meaning is essentially the same, right? This is exactly what we need, and then they continue to say that the knowledge factor is really something only the user knows. So that's an interesting observation, right? It's only the user should know that. So we know that the PAN's credit card numbers, and that was a big gotcha in some way, right, are not a knowledge factor, right? That's known by other people as well, so only the user. And 863 essentially tells you, yes, should be chosen by the user, needs to be memorized by the user. That is a secret, something you knows. Now, but in practice, the world is different, right? In practice, and this is what I looked up, right? The source is given there. Password manager exists, and they are used heavily. But what is the impact of that? The impact is that a knowledge factor is not a knowledge factor really anymore, right? Because you don't know that. I have 500 accounts, no way I know 500 passwords. Really, it's not enumerated. And you would think maybe that's an edge case, we don't have to care about that. But in practice, it's not an edge case. It's a majority case, right? You could think that the knowledge factor password is the edge case these days. 62%, in 62% of the cases, the password is written down, and that essentially makes them a lookup secret in terms of SP 800-63, and it's nothing in terms of PSD2, right? It doesn't even exist in that regulation. It makes them disappear in some way. Only in 30% of the cases, the password is still a knowledge factor. Yes, there are different statistics. Some statistics show different numbers, but the general message is the same, right? The general message is it is not as we thought, right? Passwords are not a knowledge factor, and this has a major impact, right, for two reasons. First is I don't know my password, right? And you remember, I should know my password. That was the first assumption. And second, it's only me that knows my password. Also not true, right? It's my password manager. It might be written down. Anyone looking, finding that sheet of paper or that electronic documents or having access to the cloud service will get access to that. However, I'm not saying that password managers will reduce security. The only thing I'm saying is they do not fit into our model that we thought is clean and helps us to put structure to the authentication world. It's just not a fit into that, right? So you see that the theft rates go down when you use password manager for other reasons, but according to our model, this is a big violation. So our model seems to be wrong here. And I want to really give you an analogy, right? There's a horizon. And we know that when we look to the water, right, ships disappear and they go down, right? At least they seem to go down in some way, and then you don't see them anymore. And this is exactly, for me, it's exactly what we see here. We know the password length and the password complexity that's inside our horizon. We always look into those. But there are things beyond that horizon that are the invisible things no one thinks about, but they still exist. For example, password managers. But that's only the one example. There's the other example is, and that goes beyond, it is the possession factors, right? Cloned OTP devices, which I didn't go into so far, but it's exactly the same, right? So if I have an SMS OTP, you think the possession factor is a SIM card or the eSIM, right? Because this is somehow tied to that. But in practice, it's the MNO which can give me how many SIMs in eSIMs I want tied to the same phone number, which essentially would clone that OTP device. So I would receive all these OTP one-time passcodes just on different devices, and maybe it's not only me, it's part of my family as well. And the software, the app that displays the OTP to me, right, the SMS, for example, the text message, also supports the synchronization of that contents to other devices, right? So I can see that now on other devices. So it's not a single possession factor, it's really multiple devices, which doesn't fit the definition of a possession factor anymore, at least not as it is today. And you might remember a few weeks ago, Google announced that Google Authenticator now can give you a great additional service. They can synchronize the seed of your one-time password generator, the Google Authenticator, across all your devices with Google accounts. So what does it mean? It's not a possession factor anymore, right? So we are getting into a world where there are things which we thought are true, right? This doesn't exist, it's only about this, right? But in reality, they are not. And really let that sink in for a while. It has a fundamental impact on a lot of things. So my summary one is, reality, we cannot rely on passwords being a knowledge factor that is independent from possession factors, because in the end I have just two possession factors, which is not two distinct factors of authentication or two independent elements, so it's not 2FA. So most implementations today in reality do not give you MFA according to any of those regulations and standards. This is really interesting, right? And it's, in my opinion, has a major impact, and we should think about it. Summary two would be, right? You extend the same to the possession factor, which are not possession factors anymore. And I think you get the concept. I don't have to go into summary number 3 and all the others. So it has an impact. We should rethink our model and tune that. And for me, it's a little bit like eating from the tree of knowledge, right? Before, I was looking into that, preparing that, everything was fine, right? There's a clear, clean world, right? 3 different elements, everything was fine. And now that you know it, it really changes the perspective. And there is no unlearn of that, right? You can't forget that anymore. So really it changes, and for me that was okay, this is eating from the tree of knowledge. This has an impact on, not human life, really, but at least on the security world we are living in. Okay, back to our regulated markets. What can we do? How do we handle that? So the most important thing here for me is we need to think beyond just the core authentication. It is about 2 things. The first thing is, how do I establish or register that authentication factor? Step number 1. And the step number 2 is, how do I then use that as a phishing resistant factor? But step number 1 also has an impact, because it in the end should be phishing resistant as well, and we need the strong security there. So getting back to the FIDO world, right? In the case of device-bound passkeys, I would register a credential on my smartphone, and then I can use it on my smartphone. The next day I might use my tablet. Now I can do the same on my tablet, but I would have to register first. The question is, how would I do the registration and the identity binding for that? I could use CTAP hybrid, right? From the other FIDO authenticator, I can use out of band, which is subject to phishing. I can use SMS OTPs, subject to phishing, or I could do ID proofing, which is not the nicest user experience. So in the end, right, I end up with 3 different credentials that I have to register, and then I can use, and only after I've registered those, they are phishing resistant and give me that. So from a total view, it is some kind of challenging proposition to have multiple devices in the world where only device-bound keys exist. And this was great. Relying parties needed to handle that, and they are somehow regulated to handle that. And now we are outsourcing that. Now, in the sync passkey case, it's different. I have to do the registration once. And now the passkey provider in some way handles that synchronization to a new device. So whenever I now bootstrap to a new device, I have to do the activation procedure for a new device once per device and passkey provider, but not once per device and relying party account. Right? More specifically, if I have 5 banks today, 5 bank accounts, and I would use just a device-bound passkey today, that would mean I have to do 5 different procedures, likely different, but 5 procedures when I switch to a new device. With passkeys, I would do a single one, right, to get me that new thing. And maybe banks is not the best example, but e-commerce providers, that's what we heard, was a focus of the FIDO UX guidelines initially. And so this is really the case where sync passkeys simplify the world. So 1 activation per device per passkey provider instead of 1 activation per device and relying party. This is a difference here. But adding new devices handled by the passkey provider, not the relying party, also means that the regulation somehow is impacted, because the regulation expects and mandates the relying party to handle exactly that. Right? To have a single possession factor. Now we have to deal with that situation. So what does it mean? Advantages, as we said, reduce complexity for the relying party, only 1 action per user per device, not 1 per device and relying party. So that is the user convenience advantage we really see here. Challenges are regulated entities are responsible for doing that today, but they can't do it anymore. They need to enforce the security when adding a new device. And what does it mean, enforcing security? It typically means something like that. Hi, Sarah, right? We are seeing you the first time on this new device. Now we have to verify it's really you. It's not someone else which received a airdropped passkey. Right? So that's something the relying party has to do. And now again, just make sure we don't run into the same horizon challenge that we had before. Think it through. What are the actions the relying party can do? So what are the opportunities I have as a relying party to understand whether it's really Sarah? So yes, I could do SMS OTP, but we know it's not really adding security to this one because this is phishing resistant, right? So I could just go with a sync passkey that would be more convenient for the user and give me the same security level. I can use out of band, okay, maybe that works. Combined with that strong passkey that I use, it's better than just nothing. Ideally, I use FIDO cross-device experience, or I use remote ID proofing, right? But it's limited options, and we see it's not as simple as we thought before, right? Yes, we do what we do today, which is essentially phishing-prone legacy methods. Right, so if we really want to add value and security here, we need to do something better than that. Otherwise, we could just go with it sync passkey. And this is essentially what e-commerce vendors, if you're not regulated, just go with a passkey. It's much better, much easier for the user. If you are regulated, you have to adhere to the requirements. You may have to do something in addition. And let's see what that could be. Here are the things, the opportunities you have. And in real life, now you have to understand which device you as a relying party have seen and which device you have not seen so far. And there are different things you could do. Right? The first is you can just give it a device identifier, like a randomly generated identifier you store in the local storage in the browser or a cookie or whatever. Right? Those kind of first-party cookies still exist, or local storage you can use. So if the user then creates a passkey on the first device, gets a device ID number 1, and the next day the user might use a tablet using that same passkey on the tablet. You see, okay, it doesn't know the device ID, it's an unknown device. Now I can trigger that, Sarah, it's the first time we see you on that device. Now do this, right, to make sure it's really you. And then we issue that device ID number 2, and the next day Sarah might use the laptop for doing the same procedure, and we issue yet another device ID. Right? So automatically issued and stored, no additional user interaction required beyond that what is mandated by the regulation anyways, which we cannot go around. And the good news is that works on all platforms, right? It works in browsers, it works in native apps, works on Apple devices, it works on Android devices, works on Windows devices, right? All good, right? And so that's approach number 1. It works in many situations. Sometimes people go back and say, right, this is a cookie level security. Yes, you can copy that, and we don't want that, so we need more security. More security is available as well. There's an alternative too, where you say, okay, how do we add device binding to passkeys? Let's issue a key, right? So nothing wrong with that, and there are different ways to do that. One is if you look into web authentication specifications in next upcoming draft, right? It talks about a DPK, the device public key extension. So you as a relying party can ask for another key, which is a device-bound key on that device, which you can then recognize. The public key stored here, right? And that's the key number 1, that black one in this case. So you can distinguish that key number 2, which is new to you as a relying party, and say, now, Sarah, it's the first time we see you on this device, right? We need to verify it's really you, and do the same there. Or you can use, at least in native applications, you can use URF sign-in authentication, what we have been using for years, right? To say, okay, we create that key, we store it on the device, it's not synced across, right? It's not available in the browser, but at least in the native app, we now can distinguish the known devices from the new devices, and now can understand when exactly to trigger that the first time we see you on that new device. So we need to verify it's really you. So what I'm saying is, in summary, passkeys provide better security than passwords, especially if you understand what limited security the legacy authentication methods like passwords, OTP really provide. With all these, okay, we didn't think about that because it's just beyond the horizon. So even if you change nothing else, you will improve security and convenience by using passkeys. It makes the world so much easier for users using multiple devices there, and you can augment the sync passkey to implement strong device binding. And maybe one more comment at the end is, no need to wait, right? You can implement that right now. You can augment that already today with all the technologies we have. And what is the reason I'm telling you this is? Sometimes people look at sync passkeys. Now it's becoming obvious that we are using multiple devices. So other than saying, okay, it's hidden beyond the horizon, so why don't we keep it there, right? So no one knows it. Yes, we would have liked to, maybe not, but at least with the passkey world, we cannot. It is so obvious that a passkey is not a knowledge factor. It is so obvious that a passkey doesn't only live on a single device. This is kind of the value proposition of that. Different with SIM cards, right? It's not the main value proposition that you can move from one SIM card to the other and keep your phone number. Everyone has internalized that somehow, but we forgot about that. Now, with passkeys, we really make it obvious. So we surface in these new realities, and this somehow makes us in FIDO and using passkeys, our community, the messenger, right? Now we have to tell people that our existing model is so broken. We didn't realize. It's not FIDO breaking that model. It's just the model was broken in the first place. We just didn't realize. And now we have to rethink how to fix that model, that mental model we created to just put more structure into authentication to make it easier for us to digest how authentication works. With that, thank you very much, and I think we have some time for questions.
So if you have a question, raise your hand. Bring you the mic.
In thinking of ways to augment the use of synced passkeys, since that implies synced, did you look at any kind of risk-based, signal analysis as a method of trying to detect when a passkey is used on an unrecognized device and somehow augment from there?
Yes, we did look into that as well. And there are some challenges with those existing risk-based methods. This is how do you source a signal, right? That gives you that risk information. Right, there's the device fingerprinting where you somehow ask the device, right, what kind of context do you have on that device, what are the fonts installed, etc., etc. They work with a kind of 98% accuracy on that, but they are phishable, right? And this is a bad thing. So that's not robust security where adding this DPK or the silent authenticator, this is phishing resistant, which is, in my opinion, the main thing we learned, going back to Andre's keynote in the beginning of the Identiverse, saying that with AI, right, this is changing, it is making it easier, right, or making it available to anyone now to run large-scale attacks. Right? And now the only answer the industry has against large-scale attacks is robust security. And robust means security that still works under attack. Using device fingerprinting doesn't, right? Because you can run and phish that information. So we need to make sure we add phishing-resistant methods, right, for the device recognition to that as well. Okay?
Yeah. So passkeys is great. So what are the secure methods that you say should be considered before you do the passkey registration process? Because for the new user, it's fine. They can register for the passkey, but for the existing, they are relying on the passwords. So how do we prevent somebody else to not take over the password and do the passkey registrations for on behalf of the users, the bad actors?
So very good question. And the answer is it depends on your specific use case, right? Starting with e-commerce. If users use a password today, and that is okay from a security perspective, and they will continue, right, to be allowed to use a password going forward, it's nothing wrong with just saying you log in with a password and we just propose you or suggest to use register a passkey going forward, because from a security perspective, the alternative, the weak password already exists, but in e-commerce, maybe the attack is limited, right? So yes, someone could order it, I receive it at home, I ship it back, done, right? So maybe it's not that bad. If it's different, by the way, in the regulated industries and financial industries, in that case, sure, you shouldn't just register the passkey after a simple password login. It should be a login or authentication method where you, as a relying party, are convinced that it's really that user, which in banking cases is often password plus SMS OTP or password plus I know that it's a known device, so I trust that device, so something else to just make sure I know it's really that user and then go forward. However, in addition to that, there's a reputational aspect as well. So if you see that user using a passkey successfully going forward without any complaints, the reputation you have on that passkey increases over time. So the trust you can have into that key, even though it might have been bootstrapped relatively weakly, right, that the trust increases over time, and at some point you're pretty sure it must be owned by that user. Otherwise the user would have complained months ago or so. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, so this is great, and I think this is a really good topic. I guess one of the questions and sort of the challenges, I think what you put on before, which is sort of theory, but for a regulated industry, they have to ensure control of all of the various password provider platforms, right, Google or Apple or whoever, and they all have to agree to the same type of model. How, as a regulated industry or company, are they going to say, well, I can guarantee that my employee that has their own phone is going to meet the requirements I have?
So thank you for that question. This is really great because this is another horizon effect, right? So today with the password managers, you would think, right, from that perspective, you have to ensure that all the password managers give you security. Reality is they don't. Reality is you don't even know whether a password manager is being used, and reality is as well, you don't know which one is used and which one was broken. Same with OTPs, by the way, right? Do I, as a bank, know which kind of MNO you are using and what kind of process they have in place to just protect against smishing, right? The SIM swap attacks and all these kind of things. I, as a relying party, a bank, I have no clue. Now, that was hidden. It was not obvious. With Passkey, it makes it really obvious. That's the reason for your question, right? We hope to get there, right? So I think that attestation would be exactly the right way to go here, right? Add attestation for passkey providers and add attestation for the DPK. However, we are not there yet. So we can have attestation for UF silent authenticator, and I encourage people really to leverage that. So you know that this, at least this app you're talking to is a known app. You know how that key is managed, and you know that the passkey is somehow trusted. But in essence, it's not different than the world today. We are adding security. It just now it becomes obvious where potential security challenges might be, where in the past we have always ignored them. Right? So back to, yes, we are now the messenger. We have to tell you that in the past you never knew. And now you want to know. I understand why, and I think you should know why. And with attestation, I think we have a good vehicle. We have just to make sure that you will be able to use that in practice going forward. But it's still, Passkeys is better than everything you have today.
I guess it's the moment. Yeah, I guess if I have a regulated industry, I'm going to regulate that registration. When I get blocked, certain devices I don't like,
you can still block certain devices. You know which device your app is running on. You get some information from the browser, but still, right? If I do browser-based banking, do I block that device based on what? User agent, which everyone can change? Correct. I think we are doing that, and this will have a huge impact on the bottom line, in my opinion, where the long tail of the providers which don't do a good job now at least have this security level. So I think we will get a positive impact as well. Right? It's just, yes, from a regulatory perspective, very formally looking into that, we now see, okay, maybe that's not formally compliant. It's still giving us better security. So what do we do with that? Updating regulations.
Rolf, thank you very much for a great